Another thing that I think that is key is really getting kids to understand register. Something as simple as this, the difference between una pluma, which is the archaic term for this, pluma y tintero, to bolígrafo, which is really what this is. But making kids understand the context, and I think that's part of the register. That I don't want kids going home and saying, Mommy, Papi, you've been teaching me wrong, that's not a pluma. It's not that. It's understanding that in the context of a formal setting, what is the correct vocabulary to use in that setting. And again, that goes to the whole Biggs and Kelp thing of what is the kind of vocabulary you should be using in different environments. And that we need to make sure that we're teaching students these things and teaching them register. In English, I know we only have you, or in Spanish, if you say tú, you're just like un niño mal educado, So it's getting kids to understand that, because that also goes to the differences of culture. And when they have those cultural understandings as being mentioned, and you start studying third languages such as Japanese, where it also has that depending on which verbs you're using, it shows a different level of respect. That they have a better understanding of those kinds of cultural differences. And I think we need to make it not something where they develop it without really thinking about it, but make it obvious. Make it obvious to them the cognates between languages and the similarities and differences, so they really understand it. To that, I think we also need to make sure that there's a minimum number. Secondary, as we know, they talk about that there's a gradual reduction that goes on through elementary, but CAVE has established that there is a minimum of 2 content area classes at the secondary level. Currently, we have 3 in 6th grade, and 2 in 7th and 2 in 8th, but actually we're going to increase that to next year, 2, 3 all the way across. So I'll continue at another session. Thank you.
All right, Carla. Thank you. Well, I heard a couple of questions that really sparked my interest in wanting to talk about them. And so, Maria, please help me to make sure that the last couple of minutes I really do talk about the guiding principles. but to address a couple of the questions that came up regarding what Tara said earlier about really needing to engineer some very authentic situations for sustained interaction. Something that was said within one of the questions, I already forgot what it was looking at the different languages. We talked about the different languages, and I'm also a parent. So when my daughter was going to school, she was actually my English learner. I was very proud that she was limited in English. And so that also is the same. So it kind of goes to those 2 questions. But there are some kinds of implications when you make certain decisions. But one of my favorite things to do is to work with technology integration in multilingual settings. And so I've worked with programs in Spanish, Portuguese, and Russian. It's much more difficult to find materials and craft situations in languages other than Spanish, because when you have money, you can pretty much purchase in Spanish. When you have money, you still have to develop and import in Portuguese and Russian. And so it's really difficult sometimes then to find out, well, how are we going to motivate the children to speak, especially as they get older, and technology integration, using technology as a tools for online collaborative inquiry and collaboration internationally is something that I'd love to talk about more, but I'd like to just plant that seed, because it's something that doesn't cost money per se. Today, almost every classroom has at least one computer, and this summer I'll be in Taiwan working with the International Education Resource Network, looking at these kinds of collaborations. So that's one thing that I'd like to just put on the table. Now, regarding being a parent, as I said, I was very proud that my 3rd child, my 3 children are all bilingual, we're bilingual growing up, but my daughter was the youngest one, and we were planning to put her into the NEMA's two-way immersion program. And in our district, ABC Unified, we had the Spanish and the Portuguese programs that were in collaboration with Patrick Henry, where James works. And actually, congratulations, Marino, for your 40th. This is actually our 20th anniversary. And Shelley Spiegel-Coleman, who's in the audience, was our founder and coordinator along with Chuck Acosta. But the reason I wanted to bring this up, as a parent, I was a bilingual teacher. I only ever wanted to be a bilingual teacher. Languages are, practically, our culture, religion, everything that, we were about in our family. So there was no way that my children were going to lose their Spanish. But we were planning to put her into the program, and honestly, my concern was that she was more fluent as a 4-year-old than some of even the other children, and I was more worried about her being challenged. And so the Portuguese teacher said, well, why don't you think about Karina being in the Portuguese program? And I said, I hadn't thought about it, but I talked to my husband, who is from Michoacan and had learned Portuguese, and I had studied Portuguese. We both spoke Spanish. So we said, okay, this is the only chance that one of our children will have the opportunity to be bilingual, trilingual. Now, mind you, she was limited in Spanish, and so some parents would think, well, I'm worried about her learning English. And for me, the issue was always maintaining Spanish. And so she did very well. I don't have any hesitation to say when a child is aware of one language, 2 languages, they just become that more fluent. For her, Portuguese sounded like a funny Spanish. We found her a babysitter who was one of the parents of one of the teachers, and she spoke only Portuguese to her, so she was very proud of Karina speaking Portuguese. So and by the way, she was reclassified in 4th grade, so then she had 3 languages. But implications that I would just like to mention, which goes along with the guiding principles, which help to give us a framework to really look at our programs, is the cultural piece. Although, and you really helped me to articulate a concern that I have, although my daughter was fluent to that degree in 3 languages, the pragmatics, I think, of the programs still happen to be English. And so when we look at the cultural development of the children, what I would have hoped that she would have had would have been more Portuguese influence. But if anything, there was not the recognition and the affirmation of the identities, perhaps, of the children. And in those programs, we have even more mix. So there was, African American. There was a lovely diversity. So part of my issues was then in the support of the programs, was to look for literature that was reflective in the language, but of the children that are in the program. So that's another issue that I'd love to talk about more. But finally, we were asked to talk about the guiding principles for dual language education. And I'm very thrilled that we have the guidance that we didn't have in the earlier years. And so what I was thinking about earlier is maybe we would talk about, well, how we've actually used them. But I think because my time's almost over, what I'd like to say is that it's a wonderful resource. I'm working with a FLAP program that is a mature program, but they're adding on a new program. So both for the mature programs to really take stock where we are, there is a framework then to look with the rubrics and to see where we are and where we want to go next. And then for the new programs, it helps you to look at the overview. What are all the ingredients that really we need to consider? And my final issue that I just want to leave on the table is in some of our programs we see, like James said, it's very exciting when we see the blonde-haired child speaking Spanish or the other language, but I'm very concerned about our English learners not being as proficient in their home language as well as learning English and not having the issues of equity strongly addressed in our programs. But I think that this is a very good guidance for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. I'm going to pick up right where Carla left off in terms of how the guiding principles really allow us as a community to come together to look at what guides our program design, but also what will guide our working together from educators to researchers to parents to students in the classroom to ensure that we're implementing something of quality that has the potential to have the K-12 articulation and that allows us to be able to continually revisit and refine our program design, which is essential to being able to build and continue to come back to ensure that the quality is there for the students. So as Carla said, we hang on to the guiding principles, which were derived from the principles in New Mexico, and give us the opportunity to work together again as a community to come back to research-based practices within the context of dual language.